Alrighty, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the third and final training for the City of Houston's Fair Housing Ambassador Program. We are so excited to host you today. Thank you for joining us. As a reminder, please remain muted unless you have any questions. We will have dedicated Q&A time where you'll be invited to unmute and ask your questions. Also, feel free to use the chat at any time to ask a question. We'll be monitoring chat questions closely. And finally, today's presentation is being recorded and will be posted on the City of Houston's website for future playback, as well as the recordings for training 1 and 2. So in today's training, we will be reviewing reporting tools and resources for fair housing. We'll also dive into the final few steps for the 7 steps for successful community outreach, including setting goals and metrics for success, conducting outreach, tracking progress, and follow-up. Finally, we'll transition into reviewing the Fair Housing Ambassador application, including a checklist to ensure that your application is as strong as it can be. And we'll also be doing a breakout room activity so you can network with some of the fellow participants. As a reminder, we have complimentary digital training packets available for download. Anieli just dropped that link in the chat where you can click to download a copy of today's presentation and follow along. Now I'd like to introduce Kimmy Johnson to dive into reporting, tools, and resources.
Thank you, Michaela. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us today for our third and final training, Reporting, Tools, and Resources. My name is Kimmy Johnson, and I work for HCDD as the Fair Housing Education and Outreach Coordinator. And I'm joined today by my colleague on the Fair Housing team, Megan Rowe, our Fair Housing Analyst, who you're going to be hearing from later on in the presentation. So as we go through this presentation, please know that you can ask questions at any time, and you can do so by typing in the Q&A box provided at the top of your screen. So during this workshop today, we're going to be covering the importance of reporting housing discrimination and give you an overview of fair housing complaint process. Next, we'll explore a variety of resources that you can use to build your communication and outreach plans. And then we'll cover a few funding sources outside of HCDD to keep in mind. And lastly, we're going to address any questions that may have been posted in the Q&A section. And I just want to remind everyone that the training will continue after this fair housing presentation, so please stay with us. So just a reminder, the information that we'll be providing today does not in any way constitute legal advice. We're providing informational material. So if you require legal advice, please contact an attorney for assistance. So our objectives for today, we want attendees to leave knowing where and how to report a fair housing violation. We also want you to understand what occurs after a fair housing complaint has been made and to know where you can obtain free resources and collateral as well as pursue funding opportunities. So now we'll get into reporting housing discrimination. So why is it important to report housing discrimination? Well, the first point is despite a steady decline since the peak levels of the 60s and 70s, residential segregation still exists in US metropolitan areas, including Houston. The chart on the right depicts the basis of complaints filed with HUD in recent years. And as you can see, the largest share of complaints by basis are disability, race, and national origin. And most issues identified in these complaints were related to discrimination in rental housing. The next point is that the patterns of residential segregation that we see today have not emerged by chance. And as Richard Rothstein wrote in his book, The Color of Law, the public policies of yesterday still shape the racial landscape of today. So in other words, legal forms of discrimination and racially biased policies have played a critical role in the segregation that we see in our neighborhoods today. Residential segregation did not happen by coincidence, and it was created by deliberate action and can only be undone by deliberate action. And lastly, reporting. Reporting strengthens fair housing enforcement, and the more we know, the more we can do. Reporting holds housing providers accountable for the discriminatory consequences of their actions that can ultimately lead to and reinforce systemic racial disparities in housing. So, filing a complaint. Any person who has been or will be harmed by a discriminatory housing practice may file a fair housing complaint. And we want to make sure that everyone understands that this means that the person affected does not have to be on a lease or an owner of a home in order to file a claim. The law also protects people who assist others in exercising their fair housing rights or their rights to request reasonable accommodations. So we want people to report housing discrimination. This helps us understand the discrimination that may be taking place in a community. So if you believe your rights under the Fair Housing Act have been violated, we strongly encourage you to submit a complaint as soon as possible. And there are several ways to file a complaint. You can file a complaint directly with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, also known as HUD, and through the Texas Workforce Commission Civil Rights Division. HUD provides assistance for people with disabilities who may need help in filing a claim. The number to file a complaint with HUD is 1 800 669 9777, or you can visit HUD.gov. The number for the Texas Workforce Commission is 1 888 452 4778. And the number in Houston has a nonprofit organization called the Greater Houston Fair Housing Center that can assist residents in filing a complaint. And that telephone number is 713 641 3247. So now we'll go into the fair housing complaint process. And these are the steps to HUD's fair housing complaint process that I'll cover on the next slides. So complaints that are filed with HUD are processed by their Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. They begin the complaint investigation process shortly after receiving the complaint. It's important to note that you must file your complaint within 1 year of the last date of the alleged discrimination under the Fair Housing Act, but filing as soon as possible is recommended. So here's an overview of what you can expect after filing a complaint. The first step is intake, and anyone can file a complaint with HUD at no cost. After intake is filed, an intake specialist is called and will contact the complainant for additional facts about the discrimination. Initial interviews may be conducted by telephone, and if HUD has the authority to investigate, it will file a complaint. If HUD has no authority to investigate, HUD cannot accept the complaint and the case must be closed. But if the alleged discrimination occurs within a state or locality of HUD's Fair Housing Assistance Program, HUD will refer the complaint to that agency. Filing is the next step. So once the complaint is accepted, a HUD investigator will draft a formal complaint for signing by the complainant. And within 10 days after receipt of the signed complaint, HUD will send a notification of filing of a complaint to the respondent. The respondent must submit an answer to the complaint to HUD within 10 days of receiving the notice. The next step is investigation. After a formal complaint is submitted, last slide, please. After a formal complaint is submitted, HUD will then investigate the allegations, and HUD will interview the complainant, the respondent, and the witnesses. The investigator may ask you to provide additional information, and generally, it will be helpful if you are prepared to provide a date and location of the event, the names of any people that were present or who may have information related to your complaint, as well as any relevant documents. An investigator may also collect additional documents or conduct on site visits as appropriate. So after completing the investigation, HUD will send a written report of all its findings. And throughout the investigation, they'll try to help the parties resolve the complaint through an agreement. And any agreement is voluntary, so no party is required to accept an offer. But HUD is required by statute to attempt to resolve the complaints by conciliation. After the complaint has been filed, often the parties are offered the opportunity to engage in negotiations to settle the case several times during the complaint process. So, when the investigation is complete, HUD will issue a determination as to whether or not reasonable cause exists to believe discrimination has occurred. And if they determine that there is reasonable cause, they will issue a determination of reasonable cause and a charge of discrimination. If HUD finds that there is no reasonable cause, the complaint is dismissed with a determination of no reasonable cause. So, involved parties have 20 days after receiving a notice of charge to decide whether or not to have the case tried before a federal district court judge. And if no one does so, the case is heard by a HUD administrative law judge. And finally, the Fair Housing Act does not provide a formal appeal process for complaints dismissed by HUD. However, if your complaint is dismissed with a determination of no reasonable cause, you may submit a written request for a reconsideration review. And one last thing to keep in mind about this process, your full cooperation is very important during the processing of your complaint. And failure to do so could result in a delay or even a dismissal of your complaint. So at this time, I will turn things over to Megan to walk you through some resources. Megan?
Thank you, Kimmy. Hi, everyone. As you know, my name is Megan Rowe, and I'm the Fair Housing Analyst here at the City of Houston. Now, I'd like to walk you through some of our favorite sources for free fair housing resources. We're going to go fairly quickly through a number of resources, but don't worry, all of this is available in your Session 3 training packet. So, first, we have put together a resource guide for our ambassadors. In it, we have included materials on housing discrimination and reporting, our fair housing basics and landlord tenant presentations, as well as outreach materials and other fair housing pieces we think are particularly helpful. This resource guide can be found on our ambassador website as a direct download, and we will drop that website link in the chat as well. Next, we have the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs. On this website, you will find a series of in-depth webinars on fair housing topics. These webinars are free and include videos, slides, transcripts, and handouts. Some are also translated into Spanish. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, also known as HUD, has a number of resources, including fair housing brochures in 26 different languages, as well as language ID cards for use by those who are limited English proficient. There's also a free fair housing ad campaign in Spanish available for use as well. HUD also hosts Accessibility First, which is an in-depth curriculum on accessibility for people with disabilities. For those who would like more information on this topic, this is a great resource. It has a series of modules and webinars filled with the particulars of fair housing law, accessibility, and even construction requirements. We especially recommend 2 sessions, the disability rights laws and making housing accessible through accommodations. I would also like to point out that their FAQ page is particularly great. It is a really strong resource for some of those more difficult questions that come in regarding fair housing and accessibility. The National Fair Housing Alliance provides a number of engaging YouTube videos on fair housing topics, including an excellent series created for deaf and hard of hearing audience. That series is honestly so well done. We really recommend it for everyone. It's got great explainers on reasonable accommodations, modifications, reporting discrimination, and general fair housing information. One of my personal favorite sites is the North Carolina Fair Housing Project. They have a series of well-designed, straightforward communication pieces, along with engaging videos, and everything has a Spanish translation. These pieces cover the protected classes as well as other related topics like the criminal history piece shown here on the screen. A couple of other favorites. The Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana hosts a series of live webinars throughout the year on a variety of fair housing topics. These are simple but very well done and thorough. The Fair Housing Council of Oregon has an extensive collection of brochures and other resources. A particular highlight are the sample letters to landlords, including requesting reasonable modifications. Important to note with Oregon, they do have a number of protected classes that are not protected here in Texas. So make sure that if you do use these resources, you're only using the federally protected classes and not the state of Oregon ones. The City of Houston Department of Neighborhoods hosts free webinars each month, many of which are often related to fair housing concerns. They call this series the Month of Service, and you can find more information on their website. So now we're going to transition to another key resource, funding. As we mentioned before, one of the goals of our program is to help build our ambassadors' capacity for communication and outreach around fair housing rights in their communities, and that includes funding sources outside of the Housing and Community Development Department. We're going to go through several examples now. So let's begin with the Fair Housing Initiative Program, or FIP, which is the federally funded HUD grant program that supports fair housing work. The FIP has 4 initiatives, but the one relevant to nonprofit fair housing outreach is the Education and Outreach Initiative, or EOI. EOI supports fair housing activities that are aimed to educate the public and housing providers about fair housing and equal opportunity in housing. We mention this grant because it's by far the largest source of fair housing funding, but it's also important to note that it is highly competitive. We do encourage you to read more on HUD's website and join their mailing lists for training and information on funding opportunities through the Fair Housing Initiative Program if you are interested in pursuing this opportunity. Foundations are another excellent source of funding, and there are many here in Houston and Texas. It's important not just to look for foundations that support fair housing work, but look for related keywords like equity, neighborhoods, communities, social justice, etc. 2 examples are the Texans Foundation, which just awarded a large grant program in that vein, and the Communities Foundation of Texas, which has a couple of open funding opportunities right now. We highly recommend going on the mailing lists of foundations that align with your mission, so that even if you find opportunities that are currently closed, you may be alerted to new ones in the future. Partnering with banks might be another way to receive funding to further your fair housing efforts. Financial institutions are required by the Community Reinvestment Act, known as the CRA, to meet the needs of their community. Every few years, the federal government examines each bank to ensure that they are providing services to their communities. For large banks, this examination includes a review of the bank's lending, investment, and services. A new federal rule clarifies what type of activities bank examiners will consider under these 3 categories. And we've included on this slide the list that they put together, the link to the list that they put together to clarify what activities banks might actually be looking for to fund, so that you can utilize it to create partnerships with banks located in your community. Please note, this is not an exhaustive list. Finally, there are several government agencies that have funding sources from time to time. The City of Houston's Department of Neighborhoods has a matching grant program that is open from July to November each year, and the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs also has an outreach opportunity from time to time, though currently I believe it's just large affordable housing projects right now. But again, we highly suggest getting on these agencies' mailing lists so that you can know when there are funding opportunities. Finally, we want to remind you once again that we do have a variety of outreach materials that you can use and share with your communities. I mentioned the resource guide that we have now available on the Ambassador site. We also have downloadable fair housing information in 6 different languages on our fair housing website. We have a landlord-tenant fair housing hotline that is free to any caller. The hotline is a great resource, and we want people to know that they can call anytime they have tenant landlord questions or fair housing questions. And finally, a staff member from the fair housing team is available to give presentations about fair housing related topics to any type of audience. Topics include residents' rights under the Fair Housing Act, tenant and landlord issues, fair housing complaint process, and mapping fair housing data within Houston. Thank you, and I'll turn it back over for a question and answer. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat. Okay, let's see. I see a hand raised. Yes, Jocelyn Williams, feel free to unmute yourself. Maybe we can't unmute. What's happening here?
Okay, looks like I'm able to unmute now. Perfect. Thank you so much for the opportunity to ask a question. Could you speak a little more on the opportunities that exist with partnering with the banks? Do you have any suggestions on how we would, I guess, initiate that conversation with them? Is that something that, because I don't think I've ever seen this information on like their websites or anything that, you know, they're looking for those types of relationships. Is there like a certain individual that has a role at the bank or a certain title position at the bank that we would, you know, reach out to particularly? Or could you give a little more information regarding that, please? Thank you.
Sure, that's a great question. I don't know if there is a specific person. I typically have talked with the relationship managers at the bank, the banks that I've talked to for outreach, that sort of thing. Mary, are you on the line? Do you have anything that you could add to this? I would also suggest that list is really, it's a fantastic resource. I was reading through it. It is really a chart of all the different, it has a really great breakdown. So if you go in and say, I want to talk to somebody about CRA points, especially at the end of the year when they're trying to get all their points taken care of, this is a really good time to have those conversations. So I think starting with a relationship manager there at the bank would be something that you can, at least that person would know where to go from there.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, so go in and let them know that you want to speak on their CRA points. Okay.
I don't know if that's the official title. That is how people at banks have said it to me. I don't know if points is the correct term, but it is a common use term. Yes.
And I would like to add, you can also try using LinkedIn and searching any financial institutions that are in your area to see who works there. Many times people have titles such as a community engagement specialist or community manager, and you can send them a message directly on LinkedIn. And even if they're not able to help you, they may be able to connect you with someone else at that financial institution to discuss this opportunity.
Do you have any other questions?
I see a question in the chat, Megan.
Okay, Bridget Ross in the chat says, can our organization set up educational webinars and use the information from the resources? Absolutely. Absolutely. The more people that hear this, the better. In fact, in the resource guide, when you download the resource guide, you will see it as a PowerPoint, and that is on purpose. We have included 2 of our presentations with script. You don't have to use the script verbatim, but it's there for your use if you would like it. So feel free to use those as you would. We want this information out. We do. Thank you. Okay, let's see. And forgive my voice as it comes and goes. I am battling the cold right now. I think we had a hand up. Did we answer that question? Okay, thank you, Michaela. We'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, of course. So at this time, we are going to have a brief 5-minute intermission. Please plan to join us again at about 9:35. Take this time to stretch, fill your water bottle, If you have any other questions, feel free to utilize the chat. We are available to answer those questions, and we're keeping an eye on the chat throughout the presentation. Anieli is also dropping the start and end time of our intermission. So again, please plan to join us at 9:35. After the intermission, we will also be covering the final few steps of the 7 steps to successful outreach. We'll be diving into how to turn all of this knowledge and lessons into your Fair Housing Ambassador application. We'll also be doing a breakout room activity where you'll have an opportunity to network with some peers. So please stay tuned. Join us again in about 5 minutes. All right, hello everyone. Welcome back from the intermission. In review, during training 1 and 2, we covered the first few steps to our 7 steps for successful community outreach strategy, including how to identify your target audience, develop your messaging, and making a plan for outreach as a Fair Housing Ambassador. If you may have missed training 1 or 2, we are dropping links in the chat right now with links to download the digital training packets where you will find the presentation slides. And after today's session, we will also be posting recordings from all 3 trainings for your future reference. In today's training, we will be covering how to set goals and metrics to track your success, going into the community and turning your outreach plan into action, tracking progress along the way, and finally following up and continuing to engage with your target audience about fair housing. So referring back to an example that we utilized in training 2, where you set up a table about fair housing at a local vaccination event, we are going to build off of this example and determine goals and metrics for success. This plan encompasses many of the different community outreach strategies that we covered in training 2, such as planning an event, tabling, partnerships, and social media promotion. So before you launch your community outreach strategy, which is step 5, consider what different ways you would consider your community outreach to be successful. This is step 4, setting goals and metrics for success. Goals are your most desired outcome from your community outreach, and goal setting is a really important way to track the success of your community outreach. So consider, what does success look like to you? In the case of this example, is it passing out 50 renters' rights handbooks to people who are receiving vaccines at the event? Is it talking to every single resident that you can that's attending the event and ask them if they know their rights? Goals are subjective, so you want to really critically consider achievable goals and goals that are within your resources, knowledge, and experience. Goals are different for everyone. In addition to setting goals, you also want to track as many metrics of success as you can. You may only have 3 core goals for your community outreach activities, but you can track metrics of success in a dozen different ways. We consider these metrics or measurements of performance, and in this case, success. Ways to track metrics of success in the case of our tabling at a vaccination event example include how many renters' rights handbooks you were able to pass out, how many people you were able to speak with, and how many emails you were able to collect on a sign-in sheet. So in review, the goals were having 50 people to speak with, or 50 renters' rights handbooks. So setting a very tangible number, whereas a metric would be, what did that number actually end up being? Maybe it was more than 50. Did you achieve your goal? Maybe it was 40. So you set a goal that's very close. So we want to hear from you. How do you define success? Considering either this example we've been reviewing of tabling at a vaccination event, or some of your own ideas and plans for fair housing outreach in your community, what are your goals? Drop your ideas in the chat box. We want to know. What are some metrics for success that you've used in the past? Do you have a tendency to track how many people you have conversations with at events? Do you keep an eye on how many impressions or engagements you get on social media? Just let us know in the chat. What does success look like for you? And again, please remain muted. We have dedicated Q&A time in a few minutes. For this activity, please just drop your ideas in the chat box. You can also let us know about a time that you had a community outreach goal that you were able to fulfill. Was your goal to have 50 people at an event and you had 75? This is your opportunity to share out with the group and let us know about your experience and your goals as a fair housing ambassador. So I see Kathy has added in the chat that they use data, but would love to know what software people are using to keep up. I can speak to social media, that there are many different dashboards and tools to track your impressions and your followers. And if you refer back to Training Guide 2, there is a bunch of information and resources regarding social media. So if you've not yet downloaded Training Guide 2, or if you may have missed that training, all of those resources are posted on the City of Houston's Fair Housing website and are available to support you. See, Jocelyn has had a goal to pass out fair housing packets to all of the households in her community. That is a very amazing goal. Carrie has mentioned that one of the ways that she tracks her outreach is asking for names and emails. And this is another great metric, just tracking the number of people who opt in to receive future communication from you. You will also discuss collecting emails and phone numbers in the future, because our 7th step is follow-up, and you'll be setting yourself up for great success in your follow-up if you are asking people while you are doing your fair housing activities for their information. So in review, once you've worked your way through steps 1 through 4, you're ready for step 5, which is actually going into your target community and turning your fair housing outreach plan into action. As you conduct your community outreach, don't forget those previously set goals and metrics that we just reviewed. Track your progress through those goals and metrics, and think critically about whether you have achieved your goals or your progress towards those goals. And if in the future you have to reevaluate whether your goal was too low or too high. So consider these as you are conducting your outreach. Collecting this data, such as how many people you spoke with, how many pamphlets you distributed, or how much contact information you were able to gather according to your goals, is really important when you are part of a grant program, such as the Fair Housing Ambassador Program. You must demonstrate that you have fulfilled your proposed plan as a Fair Housing Ambassador and were successful in your plan in order to be eligible for reimbursement. In the case that you are unable to fulfill all of your goals or follow through with your proposed plan, you may not be eligible for reimbursement through our program. But have no fear, we are here to support you, and we want to provide as many resources and opportunity to receive feedback as possible. So if you have not yet signed up for a coaching session, our first group coaching session is this afternoon at 1 p.m. We also have coaching on Wednesday and Friday. These are video sessions when you can drop in at any time with your prepared questions and ideas to receive feedback from marketing experts and ensure that you're on the right track. We also have a couple of one-on-one coaching sessions available still. These are 30-minute sessions available Wednesday through Friday this week. You can use the Calendly link that's been dropped in the chat by Aniele to select a time that works for your schedule, and you'll receive a video link to participate in that one-on-one. As a refresh, our one-on-ones are reserved for participants who attended all 3 trainings. So please only sign up for a one-on-one if you have attended all 3 of the live trainings. Otherwise, please plan to join one of our group coaching sessions. Bring your questions so we can provide you with the most tailored feedback as possible. Again, Aniele has dropped all of these links in the chat for your convenience. So the final step in our 7 steps for successful community outreach is follow-up. Follow-up can be just as important as your initial community outreach activity because it continues to engage with your target audience about fair housing. When you are creating a plan for your community outreach, make sure you are considering how you will follow up. So as one of the examples and a participant mentioned in the chat, they would like to collect emails for a newsletter and calling folks. And if that is one of your goals for follow-up, you should make an effort to collect and ask residents at your community outreach activity if they would like to opt in. You can ask for emails, their phone number to call or text, and after your activity, whether it's an event or tabling, you can contact them and thank them for participating or add them to future communications like a fair housing newsletter, text them about future fair housing activities in the area, and overall continue engaging with them. Similarly, if building a social media following was one of your goals, and you can utilize that as a follow-up strategy. So as you're conducting your community outreach activities, include your social media handles on your print materials, like your posters and pamphlets, to direct people to follow you on social media. And once you've concluded your activities, such as an event, post pictures about it on social media so that you will continually pop up in the feeds of your followers. This is a really low barrier to entry to continue engaging with multiple residents in your community, as people are already on their devices and social media on a daily basis. Another follow-up strategy is to gain media coverage. So after your community outreach activity has concluded, you can reach out to local media, and we've included a press list in your digital training packets for this purpose, and try and gain coverage about your work. And this will increase the visibility of your community outreach and also your visibility in the community as a fair housing ambassador by receiving press coverage. And finally, additional outreach is one of the most effective forms of follow-up. By continuing to plan additional community outreach activities, you are building a consistent connection with your target audience, and you're letting that community know that you are a fair housing ambassador and you are there to support them. Going back to our training 2, we provided a week-by-week timeline worksheet, as well as running through an example. And you may remember that we had planned an event, and by week 8, that event had concluded, which leaves approximately 5 additional weeks in the Fair Housing Ambassador outreach period to conduct more activities. So if one of your goals is to conduct multiple activities, or if additional outreach is a priority with your follow-up, make sure you are leaving time in your overall plan to do additional activities. And as a final note, if you partnered with another organization to conduct your fair housing outreach, make sure that you are teaming up with them to share the responsibility of follow-up. They also may have innovative ideas to continue engaging with your target audience. And essentially, teamwork makes the dream work. And if you can share the responsibility of planning your community outreach, you can certainly share the responsibility of follow-up. And that concludes our run-through of the 7 steps to successful community outreach. If you have participated in all 3 of our training sessions, give yourself a pat on the back. You have been able to dive into depth of each of these community outreach strategies, and you have a solid foundation to build out your community outreach plan as a fair housing ambassador. These skills are valuable whether you plan to submit an application to become a funded or volunteer fair housing ambassador, or just taking these skills back to your community as a community leader and volunteer. So now we're going to transition from the community outreach steps to the actual fair housing ambassador application. Anieli is dropping a link in the chat right now where you can access the online fair housing ambassador application. We recommend that everyone works your way through that application in review to know what information you need to prepare, and that is available through next week. So you can access that at any time and go through the different pages to review what type of information you need to prepare in order to submit a fair housing ambassador application. So, how can you ensure that you are crafting a winning proposal to become a fair housing ambassador? If you have participated in all 3 of our trainings, you know that I am a big fan of checklists. I feel that checklists are a really effective and organized way to make sure that you're touching on all of the best practices as you work your way through the checklist. And this also helps to ensure that you are considering all of the different recommendations we have provided. So this strong application checklist starts with following the 7 steps to successful community outreach. We have gone through this formula in depth through all of our 3 training sessions to help guide you through building a strong fair housing ambassador outreach plan in your community. You can also utilize all of the different resources from those trainings, like the persona activity, the timeline worksheet, and the Houston press list, all of which I continue to refer to, as these are included in the digital training packets for each of those trainings. We've created all of these resources to help you build a very strong foundation for a targeted, effective, and persuasive fair housing outreach plan in your community. Additionally, in the application, you will be asked to describe your organization, its mission, and any ongoing work that you're doing. And this is your opportunity to emphasize what makes your organization unique and really well positioned to be doing fair housing outreach work in your community. So sell it to us. Let us know. Why are you the best person for the job? What pre-existing relationships do you have in your community that will support your work as a fair housing ambassador? This is your opportunity to tell us what makes you different and really well equipped to be a fair housing ambassador. Additionally, you want to demonstrate that you are qualified to be a fair housing ambassador, and you can do so by providing examples of previous community outreach work that you've done in your community. And reflecting on the not so successful community outreach is just as important. So if you've done work and experienced barriers like a language barrier or not having folks attend your planned events. You want to consider how will you overcome those challenges in your Fair Housing Ambassador application. Now that you have all of this new knowledge and experience going through the training series and your firsthand experience with those barriers, consider and show us how you will overcome those barriers as a Fair Housing Ambassador. We also encourage everyone to utilize the plethora of resources and support from the City of Houston's Housing and Community Development Department. Anieli is dropping a link in the chat to the Fair Housing website, which has resources such as posters in multiple languages, the resources that Megan and Kimmy went over in the first half of today's presentation, including links to external organizations and their different resources. All of these are available to you on the website to download, and these are free resources. You can also contact Megan or Kimmy with any of your questions or contact the Fair Housing Hotline. These are all free opportunities where they can share their knowledge with you. And finally, I cannot recommend this enough. Participate in our group coaching or one-on-one coaching sessions so you can receive personalized feedback on your ideas and plans as a Fair Housing Ambassador in your community. If you feel uncertain about any of the steps of the 7 steps to success as you're working through your ideas, bring those questions and we can help clarify and answer your questions and ensure that each of your steps is building off of the previous to ensure that it is persuasive, effective, and targeted. Again, those group coaching sessions start this afternoon at 1 p.m. We have group coaching on Wednesday and Friday this week. We also have a couple of one-on-one coaching sessions, and the link is going to be posted in the chat. It's a Calendly link where you can open up a calendar and schedule a 30-minute video call at a time that works for you with one of our marketing experts. So at this time, I can take any questions about the final few steps of the 7 steps for successful community outreach or the checklist to build a strong application. Feel free to unmute if you have a question. We'll also be monitoring the chat. So again, if anyone has any questions, you can unmute at this time and ask. And I'm also checking through the chat right now to see if there are any previous questions that I can answer. So I see Tia had asked about the group coaching links. We are posting a link to download the digital training packet, which outlines each day, time, and the link to join the group coaching. So if you've not yet downloaded the Training 3 digital training packet, that has all of the links that you need. Bridget asked if she missed the first 2 trainings, how could they catch up and fully participate in the program? This is a fantastic question. After today's training session, we are posting recordings of all 3 trainings on the City of Houston's Fair Housing website. And we also have digital training packets that are live. Sorry about that, everyone. We also have digital training packets that are live on the website right now that you can download to receive a copy of the presentation slides and all of the examples and worksheets from the training sessions that you may have missed. So keep an eye on the City of Houston's Fair Housing Ambassador website when those recordings are posted, and you can also download the presentation slides right now on the website. And if you are not asking a question, please remain muted. Anne asked, do we have to sign up for group coaching? No, this is kind of like office hours. You can drop in at any time during the group coaching. We just ask that you come prepared with your questions to make sure that we have enough time to give you really personalized feedback. And you're also welcome to sit in on the group coaching for the entire session and listen to any other peers' questions. So no, you do not need to sign up. You just drop in. All right. And I have enough time to take one more question. Would anyone like to unmute and ask their question? I've also got my eyes on the chat.
This
All right.
is Julia Fawn to know. When you say drop in, does that mean we come to your office?
Thank you for asking that question. All of our group and individual coaching is via video. So you can utilize the links. They are video conferences on Zoom. And for example, this afternoon, our group coaching is from 1 to 2 p.m. And if you have another commitment until 1:30, you are welcome to join our video for the group coaching at your available time. And again, we just ask that you come prepared with your questions and ideas so we can provide feedback to everyone on a really individualized basis. Same thing with the one-on-ones. They are video. And when you sign up for a 30-minute one-on-one, you'll receive an email notification that includes your video joining link. Oh, my apologies. And please unmute and we can take your question.
Yes. So this question is maybe a two-fold question. So I work for an organization. Well, first of all, a lot of the presentation that was covered here, there are a lot with laws, the rights that renters have through federal laws. But I work for an organization that is on the process of developing affordable housing. And so we want to make sure that we are recruiting the right renters, meaning the underserved communities. And I'm wondering if this is a grant that will be feasible for my organization to apply, because it seems like a lot of the training was covered mostly about educating the community. But if you're an organization like mine that's building affordable housing, I'm wondering if this is something that we could apply for. And I don't know who may be able to answer this question.
Hi, this is Megan Rowe. I'll take a stab at it. It really depends on your activities. Affordable housing is definitely something that Fair Housing is concerned with, especially in Houston. There's all sorts of things that we could tie to that. So affordable housing in itself is not the problem. It's just that this is an outreach grant. So you would have to be doing education and outreach activities. And that is covered if you look at the eligible activities in the application, it does go into that a bit. So it depends on what you propose to do with the money, frankly. Being an affordable housing organization, though, is definitely that's definitely within our realm of work. Does that answer your question?
It does. It really does. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
And did you have a second question?
Well, the second question was if my organization was not going to qualify right within those terms, and was going to take a stab at this grant from a student perspective. I am working on my PhD in affordable housing, actually, but I rather focus this grant from an organizational perspective. So there's no need for a second question, actually. So it was answered the first time around. Yeah.
Okay. And also, if you were not aware, and maybe you are, but the CRA activities have a lot of affordable housing activity suggestions. So definitely take a look at those if you haven't been aware of them.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do we have any last questions to unmute? I don't see any more questions in the chat.